Hey, yo, everyone, gather round. It's story time. Brought to you by the University of Alaska Fairbanks, Department of Social Work, and Conscious Party Productions. You are listening to The Critical Social Worker, a revolutionary storytelling podcast.
A conscious party.
Revolutionizing our minds.
Elevating our consciousness.
Changing our worlds.
Your story.
My story.
Our story.
All right. Welcome to another episode of The Critical Social Worker, a revolutionary storytelling podcast. I'm your host, Christian Ace Stettler, and I think we are on episode 62, but don't quote me on it. I lose track. And we're over here on Zoom. I'm not sure how this is going to look on the final recording, but we had some technical difficulties, but we're getting through it. So we are recording here on Zoom, and I am very happy to be joined this afternoon by Mr. Stephen Silva-Brave. What's up, Stephen? I can't hear you.
Of course, we wouldn't be on Zoom if I didn't forget to unmute. I feel like I do that every time. Yeah, I'm doing good. My semester is winding down over here. Like I'm on campus actually right now, and once I leave, then I will not be back for a month. So I'm feeling good, getting in that holiday mode and all of that. Good to be back here on with you. Good to see that you didn't cut your hair. Whenever I see your Instagram clips and all of that, and your hair's pulled back, it looks like it's cut. As a long hair brethren, I was wondering if you were still growing it.
I'll make a commitment to you right now. If you see me with my haircut, I'm either sick or somebody else forced me to do it. I'm not going to cut my hair. I was a bald head. I say this a long time, for a while now. Bob Marley has a song about chasing the crazy bald heads out of town. And I say I chased that crazy bald head out of town a long time ago. My hair represents a lot of what I believe in my character. It's not like a tit for tat thing, but it means a lot to me and to my whole family. None of my family has really cut their hair in a long time. It's all about it.
Yeah, similar over here.
Yeah. How long have you been growing yours? Forever?
No. I think it's 6 years now. But yeah, mine, most of my life had like a fade, and usually I would even do like the 3 at the top, and then the double zero. I loved having a clean fade, all of that. And then in 2018, when I started getting back into like some of our ceremonies and things like that I grew up around, but I had got detached from them, I decided for the first time in my life that I was going to let my hair grow, and just kind of, for Indigenous people, Lakota, which I am, but I'm sure it's the same even maybe for yourself, like it represents a lot. And for me, it there's no going back now. Now I'm moving forward. I'm growing my hair. If I ever get to a place where they tell me like, oh, you can't work here or you can't be here if you have to cut your hair or whatever, then it's just peace. Like, okay, well then that's just not meant for me. Yeah, it has a lot of meaning.
Yeah, it's. I'll share a quick story, or kind of a little collection of stories. When I was a little boy, my mom made me have long hair, and I think it was a little bit mulletish, but it was very long in the back, and I hated it. And I thought I was supposed to have short hair, and I convinced my auntie to take me to the barber, and they asked me what I wanted, and the only thing I knew was called a buzz cut, and they shaved it off, and my mom was terrified. But I never had. I mean, I might have had a little fade here or there, but for the most part, I've had a haircut every couple of weeks for forever. And then when I was a senior in my undergrad, that would have been almost exactly 10 years ago. Matter of fact, I'm coming up on my 10-year anniversary of my hair on New Year's Eve. So that New Year's Eve in 2014 into 15 was the last time I really cut my hair. And ever since then, I was always a troubled individual, always felt like I had a curse hanging over my head. And even though I had triumphed a lot up to that point, I was still stuck in some alcoholism and making a lot of mistakes with relationships in my life. And since I stopped cutting my hair, and I'm not saying it's all about the hair, but since I stopped cutting my hair, I've got a master's degree. I've become a college professor. I've got a beautiful wife, 3 beautiful children. So on one end, it's like, why would I fix something that's not broken? And then I also wanted to speak to what you said about sometimes people frown upon non-conservative looking hairstyles and whatnot. And I'm basically of the mind that if you don't like it, then I guess you don't like me. And so if there was a job that required me to have short hair, then that's not a job for me, because this is who I am. Yeah. So I just appreciate that you brought that up. It's cool.
Yeah. No, it's we probably have a lot of the same feelings on it. Yeah. I know that wasn't a goal of the thing, but I was going to ask you about it. I assumed it was going to be back in the ponytail, like how it's been in most of the episodes. And like, but when I saw it down, I said, okay, cool.
Sometimes it flusters me. It's gotten better since the longer I've had it. But sometimes, like if I'm hooking up microphones and stuff, it gets in my face. And
Yeah.
flustered because I'm like an ADD mind. I'll get flustered and then I'll end up just taking it back or putting it in a ponytail.
Yeah, I can never have mine down like how you have yours, probably for a lot of the same reasons, but also in our Lakota tradition, they teach us, sometimes they say that like when your hair is down and it's not braided or in a tail or put up or something like that, it carries more of like other people's energy and stuff like that. And so I'm taught not to do that. So when like I always have it, like I rarely have it down like how you have it. But also too, like even if I just wake up in the morning and it's like that and I'm trying to sweep or take the dogs out or whatever, like you said, like it's a lot when it's down like that. But yeah, I don't have mine down much either unless they're in braids.
Yeah, I'll think more on that and reflect upon that. And same thing, it flusters me. And I think since having short hair most of my life is not having the muscle memory and whatnot to do my hair. And so at first, my wife had to even put my hair, pull it back. I couldn't even, I mean, I may be able to put it in a ponytail, but as far as like putting it up or something, I couldn't even do it. And then obviously over time, you get a little practice. But as far as like braiding or whatnot, the only way I can do it is if my wife or somebody else were to do it. And I'd really like to make that commitment to just take the time and make it a ritual practice for myself, personal, and be able to do something like that on my own, And I know it would take a lot of work. And
Yeah. It's practice, but yeah, I can braid mine now. But yeah, in the beginning, so in our ways, like my wife is the only person who should ever braid my hair other than me or my mom, like your partner, your parents, something like that. And so she did it in the beginning, but then I learned, and then now. And yeah, whenever I do it, I'm praying, I'm doing it. It's very meditative. And some days, like today, it just takes a couple minutes. Some days it might take me 10 or 15 minutes and I'm having to do it over. And I can tell that like it's because my mind's not there. My mind's not on, it's supposed to be a simple process. And I'm kind of overthinking it, too concerned with one hair being out of place, something like that. So there's a lot of metaphors to me that goes into something so simple as braiding your hair. But yeah, you could do it with work. I still don't know how to throw my hair up in a bun. Like I see people at the gym do that, and sometimes I want to do that. I'll have it in a ponytail. I'm like, man, I wish I just knew how to throw it up in a bun. I do not know how to do that.
yeah, it took me forever. But you were giving me the chills just talking about just sharing what you were just sharing. And I think that would be, I don't know the right word that I would use or phrase, but I honestly like envisioning myself being able to do it. It would be a spiritual accomplishment for me because I'm also, besides the AD, I can be hard on myself and I can imagine myself. It's probably why I am so hesitant to start it, is me getting mad at myself for hair being out of place or frustrated. And so I think it would be a real accomplishment for me to be able to have the patience to sit down and accomplish that. And I would be proud of myself when I do it.
Yeah, you could do it. I'm both of those things too. I'm hard on myself. I'm diagnosed ADHD, and it did take a lot of work. It was not easy, but it takes a lot of work. But then it's just like any of those other things. Once you get it, then you got it, and you feel really, really good. And then like on the days that it just clicks, and you're like, okay, yeah, I know I'm in the zone today. I got it.
Yeah, well, we've done some good job talking story about hair, and I think it's really relevant and important, seriously. And I hope that you all that are listening got something out of it. And I don't know if we've done like 4 takes now, so I don't know if I said this on this broadcast already, but if you have a question or you would like to chime in, feel free to, I don't know, we're on Zoom, so you can maybe raise your hand or just put it in the chat. But if you want to come on video, just raise your hand and we'll bring you on. I'll pin you on here. And I'm going to come back to Stephen in just a minute. We're going to talk about some of his story, but I don't want to forget about Donalee. How are you, Miss Donalee?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you for having me. This is an honor and a privilege to be on your podcast with Stephen.
Yeah, well, we're glad to have you. And we'll get into some talks about decolonization and indigenizing social work education and whatnot in a little bit, but you're teaching as well. Besides the whole plagiarism thing, how's the end of your semester going?
Yeah, it's going well. I'm a mentor for one of the students finishing up her capstone project, and that's always exciting. So she will be defending shortly. And yeah, so it's going well. Thank you for asking.
Yeah. You got a lot of work left before you wrap it up for the semester?
Yeah, grading. You know how that is.
Yeah. grading. I've been doing I teach practice this semester, motivational interviewing, solution-focused interviewing, and it's online asynchronous. So while I've been providing opportunities for them to come and practice, they got to do a final interview with me. And so I've been doing those, and I actually really enjoy it. And I hold it as not a test. I don't expect you to be able to come and to demonstrate mastery of these things. I look at it as a final opportunity to practice and for us to walk through it together if we need be, so that the most important thing is that the students leave in with some tools in their belt and they feel a little bit more comfortable than they did before, confident.
Yeah, exactly. I have one more week of class and then we're done. So yeah, but yeah, that's important. The more you can practice, the better you get at it.
Yeah. Are your classes in person?
No, I am asynchronous. Yeah, online.
Yeah. Have you had any success connecting or finding different ways to connect, being asynchronous?
Yeah, I do a Zoom office hour. But it's really hard because everybody's schedule is so different. And then they have activities, they work. But yeah, but I'm going to try next semester when I teach this class, I'm going to try this jam session and see how that goes. I really like that idea.
Yeah, I think if I could give any advice regarding that is that the most important thing, I think, is to be consistent. Two most important things are just to be consistent and authentic. We're all different as teachers, professors, as facilitators. And the important thing, I think, with talking circles is that they're regular, because one talking circle doesn't do the job, if you know what I mean. It's to gain comfort and all of that. It takes time, and for some folks, it's going to take a week. Sometimes it's going to take 15 circles for someone to feel comfortable to start sharing. And so that's my advice. If it's folks feel uncomfortable at first, that has always changed from my perspective over time.
Yeah, that's good to know. Yeah, so you do it once a week, right?
I do them 2 or 3 times a week, actually. Yeah. I used to have them assigned to each class, but then I thought, because some people said, well, why? I wish you do it on the weekend, or I wish you do it on the evening. So then I just made them so anybody could come. So the circles are not really tied specifically. We may talk about content from the class a little bit, but for the most part, it's more of a place for students to connect with each other, for them to unburden their heart. Like my old mentor, Grandmother Rita, would say, you can't really learn if your heart is burdened, if you're walking around with a burden on your heart. And so that's how I view it, as an opportunity for us to connect and for us to make sure that we're able to learn without our hearts being burdened, or at least have some reprieve from that a little bit.
Right. I think that's important.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get into some of the more meat and potatoes of the podcast. And I think to start off, I would like to talk to you, Stephen, about your story. You've been on before, but it was on our old platform, and we had technical difficulties on that too, as far as some of the sound issues and everything like that. So I thought we could just start from scratch here, if you don't mind. And for those that are tuning in that aren't familiar who you are, if you just share a little bit of your story about maybe your descent and then your ascent back up to where you're at now.
Okay, yeah. And I might be a little out of practice of sharing my story. I used to feel like I would share it so much, I would get tired of sharing it. And then now, like, I've started focusing on so many different things that sometimes I'm like, man, I don't like really talk about my story that much anymore. But yeah, for me, really the easiest place to start without taking too long and going too far back would probably be like around the time I graduated high school. I was 18 years old. Me and my wife, she was my girlfriend then, my wife now, we were pretty involved in a Christian church, and I was going off to college first semester. She was not my first girlfriend, but first really, really serious girlfriend. She ended up getting pregnant. And the church that we were in said, that's a sin, which that's the way that we were taught in that church. That's a sin. But they were really, really hard on us, right? We were 2 kids. They were going to punish us and give us rules of like how the wedding had to, like we had to get married and how the wedding had to be, these certain rules, this and that. And like it has to be on a Sunday in between church services. We can't have this big wedding. She can't wear white. And then once we get married, we have to sit at the back of the church. So that it's a thing that church did called discipline. So people had to know that we had acted out, things like that. And when we left that day, I said, nah, none of that's going to happen. We're going to be all right together. But we left immediately that day and I went and drank. It wasn't the first time in my life that I had drank, but it was the first time that I had drank to forget about problems or because I was so upset. I had, you know, dabbled in high school and stuff like that, and like a few times of have a beer or like, hey, everyone's doing this, have a shot, have fun. But that was the first time that I remember like, and it wasn't just that day, it was like a little while later, you drink again. And then here I am, 18 years old, my girlfriend's pregnant. I was going to college, but then like, oh, now got to work. And then she got, so my sons are only 13 months apart. So she got pregnant again really quick right after had the second one. And so I had to drop out of school, out of college, only focus on work. And then here I am, 19 years old, 2 kids, working 40 something plus hours a week. All the other guys at work, hey, come and let's have some beers after work. And they're much older than me, drinking, smoking weed, hanging out. So I just kind of got into that lifestyle, which I would say is pretty normal for working men that just end up working. And that's like what you do to blow off steam. But for me, and what happens with a lot of people, of course, it went from blowing off steam on the weekend to now we're drinking 3 or 4 nights a week. And then it just got into the pattern of, and this is a, progression over the years from weekends, drinking a little to, Friday night, as soon as we get home, buying a bottle of Jack Daniels and sometimes finishing it on that same night to, by the end, I'm drinking every single night and I'm doing things that I had said that I would never do, like waking up in the morning and drinking before work so that I don't have a hangover. And so it's about 12 years of really drinking. And in 2016, I started not feeling so good. I knew that something was up and I figured that it was because of my drinking. I just was getting sick. I was starting to cough, spit up blood. And then my abdomen was really sore, really, really sore. I couldn't hug my kids. When they would hug me, I was tired all the time. I eventually had to I stopped working because I said, I need a rest. I've been working really hard since I'm 18 years old. I need to also have some time to kind of get this drinking thing under control. We have some savings. Let me use that up for like 2 weeks to a month and get things under control. Well, during that time, then that's when I started like turning yellow and stuff. And I knew that it was definitely my liver. On June 29, no, May 29th of 2016, I woke up in the morning, had a really hard time getting out of bed. My legs were swollen. I was yellow. And my wife said, we're going to go to the emergency room. And when we were going to go to the emergency room, I knew that that was going to be the day that they were going to tell me, like, you have to stop drinking. And I even said to myself, like, I'm cool with that. Like, I want to stop drinking. And when I went and they, see me and they do blood work and all of that, almost immediately they admit me to the hospital. They come, they say, hey, we're going to run these scans, but you're definitely not going home. And they diagnosed me with cirrhosis of the liver. And I was 32 years old, 2, young kids. And there it was. And at that time also, I was 310 pounds. So not only had I, over those years, started drinking a lot, just that lifestyle, which I never really got in trouble or anything. And I had kept working through all of it, kept my marriage, stayed my decent father. But really, my thing was I would go to work, I would come home, I would drink, I would sit on the couch, drink, eat. 310 pounds. Y'all probably can't tell on the Zoom because on the Zoom, I'll probably look like I'm 6'5", really tough looking, really. But I'm only 5'5", right? Not scared to admit it. I'm 5'5". So 310 pounds, I was like you could check me out on Instagram. If you see those pictures, I looked like a ball. I was near death. And when I was in the hospital, I was there for 8 days, and there was a doctor there that was saying, hey, we're going to get you out of here, but we know you're going to be back. So we see people like you all the time, and you're young, and this is what's going to happen. You're going to stop drinking for a while because you're scared, and you're going to start drinking again, and you're going to get sick again. It's like you'll go through that cycle a couple times, and then you'll probably pass away before you're 35. And I was like, how dare him tell me that? And I remember my sister-in-law was in the room with me when he was telling me that, and she was really upset too. But I'm glad he told me that because, and this is the thing, some people say like, oh, he was doing like a Dr. Jedi mind trick on you, right? Like he was trying to get you to prove him wrong. But I honestly think, just knowing what I know now as a counselor, and I think he was being honest with what he sees. He was just being 100% honest. But it made me say, like, I'm going to prove this guy wrong. I'm going to show him that I am different, that I am supposed to do something with my life. And then honestly, I was scared. I said, man, I can't do this to my kids. There was another doctor that was telling me, even if you get better, if you don't make like drastic changes, like you might not pass away, but your kids are going to be very embarrassed of you because you're going to be sick. And I was just determined to make a change. And over the next 18 months, so like 2016, 2017, everything changed. I lost 155 pounds. Now, some of that in the very beginning was because I was so sick, but I would say that was maybe from like June to December. So like I got a good head start of losing about 30 pounds or so from being so sick and not really being able to hold a lot of food down and stuff like that. But just being sober and starting to move around some. And then it's like once I picked up that momentum, I was like, I was not stopping. And it was everything. It was the momentum of getting sober, the momentum of getting healthy. And then I started, when I was like sober for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, all of those milestones, I would share it because it was a really big deal to me because I hadn't been like 3 or 4 days without drinking before. And then I would have people say, hey, I'm sober also. Hey, I don't really talk about it, but I haven't drank in 6 years. I haven't. And I started thinking like, man, I wish these people would have told me like, hey, it's cool not to drink. It's okay not to drink. And they're like, oh, I don't really talk about it. It's not really anybody's business, which is true. It's up to people if they want to share it or not. But I started thinking I want to be vocal about it because I wish there was somebody that I knew in my life. And then a lot of people did start coming to me for help. And I kind of got that itch that like, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do. This is what, so then 2018, around the same time when I started growing my hair, started reconnecting with my Lakota roots, which that's a whole other thing. When people say reconnecting, sometimes they mean one thing, like they didn't know they were Native or something. Like I knew I was Native my whole life. Like we lived with my grandma. Like I always knew I was Native. There's never that. But I started getting back into practicing our beliefs, practicing our spirituality. And that's around the same time that I went back into counseling. I mean, got into counseling as like going to school, and everything has just rolled on from there. I went from 310 pounds to running marathons to, which I can't run a marathon right now. Like right now, I like, if I could go outside and run a mile right now, I would be surprised. But I did that in 17, 18, went back to school, got into social work, which I'd never, like, that wasn't a thing that was ever on my radar. Now here I am pursuing a PhD. Everything's just so different from how it was right there. It's kind of crazy when I say it and talk for however many minutes I just did telling like that story. And of course, that's like a very, very short version, leaving out a lot of highlights and stuff. But yeah, that's basically it.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of depth into to all of your experiences day by day, week by week, year to year. And going back to your experience when the dude told you about that, you were going to stay sober for a while and come back and continue drinking and possibly eventually die. when I went to, this was 20 years ago now, maybe a little bit more actually, I walked to rehab and checked myself in. And the first thing I remember, I was offended because he asked me if I shot up and I said no. And he made me show him my arms, and I felt disrespected in that way. But then he did the same thing, not the exact same thing, but very similar. He went and showed me the filing cabinet, and he said, you see, these are all the people that came in here for meth. They're all their pictures in there if you want to look at them. You know, like about 5% of them are still around somewhere that I know about. And I was like, and I can't remember exactly what he said, but essentially he was saying that really people that come in here addicted to meth, they really don't make it very often. And so I see that some potential in you, but it's unlikely that you're going to succeed. I just want to let you know that. And I remember my attitude was like, yeah, right. I'm not me. I'm going to do it. And then when you get into, at least my experience, when I was in treatment, I was in there for 28 days, I think. And you make relationships, right? People are at different parts of their own past. Some people already been in there for a few weeks. As you're in there, new people come in. And everybody that came in, I was like, there's no way these guys are not going to make it, or this woman's not going to make it. You know, we're going to make it together, and we're going to connect, and we're going to do it. Well, it's been 20 years, and it's a long time, but I don't know where any of those people are at. And I kept in contact with some of them, and they were in for different reasons, some alcohol, some heroin, some cocaine, but I don't know where any of them are. And I think there's one guy that I think is pretty successful that I was friends with, and we just disconnected, but pretty much everyone else that I thought we would all stick together. I don't want to dismiss that there might be some success out there, but not that I know of, and not even via social media or anything. They've completely gone off the way. I've even looked for folks wondering what happened to them or whatever. One person was in jail, and I tried to write it, and it got sent back. But I just wanted to say, like, for people like you and I, just listening to you tell your story makes me want to pat myself on the back and makes me want to give you a big hug, to be honest with you, because it is the reality is that so many people don't make it out of that. And, you know, one wrong step for me, I could have been in prison. One wrong step from you, you could have drank too much and whatever could have happened. You could have lost certain physical capabilities, or all the way to what the guy was threatening you with. And so, I mean, to make it this far where both of us are on the cusp of a PhD, I just think it's really it's hard to do sometimes, but take a step back and say, we did good, brother. You know what I mean? We did it, and much respect to you. And I just would say, keep telling your story. For me, I was afraid to tell my story. I thought people would judge me, that they'd look down upon me. And now it's like, I don't know, like something on my resume, something that's a part of my spiritual background. And I could never have been the person that, or could have never become the person that I am had I not gone through all those things. And so, yeah, I just wanted to reflect that and say, I appreciate you, and please don't stop telling your story.
Oh man, yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, and I'm glad you had me do it, because it kind of is like a reminder to myself, because the reason I got away from it is because, you know, now when people come to me, instead of saying, oh, hey, I want help getting sober, or hey, I've heard you lost all this weight, how did you get healthy? That was the stuff people were doing back then. Now they see my work and they're, you know, asking about decolonization, missing and murdered Indigenous women. So it's like the topics just kind of changed, and then I like forget, like, man, there's still this other side too. It's just naturally, I had never made like a conscious decision, like, oh, I'm not trying to tell my story anymore. I even had noticed one time the last time when we tried to do the podcast and we kept having the technical difficulties, and you had mentioned, you know, about my story and stuff. And then I was looking at my Instagram, and I was like, man, my Instagram now is just only me promoting, like, hey, I'm going to be doing this, or hey, we did this event, it's like, man, I don't really even share my story anymore. Like, maybe I need to get back to that. Like, I was like being hard on myself after that. While I was looking at it, I was like, my Instagram just looks like a very self-promoting page right now instead of something different. But I appreciate you bringing that out.
Yeah, you never know who it might impact. I mean, even me right now, I mean, it's not like I needed to stay off drugs or alcohol or anything right now, but it does mean something to me. And I see myself in you. And I think whether it's students that are tuning in or whatever, people that are struggling, who knows who might be able to see themselves in you. And it's almost like the miracle question in solution-focused interviewing. They see that's a glimpse into what their own future might be like. Not exactly, but it says, hey, I could do that too. And I have some of the most meaningful moments I get from students are the ones that reach out to me and they say, hey, I didn't think professors were like me at all. And I see myself in you. And these are like Native students, Black students, white students, all kinds of things. So it's not like a racial or a cultural thing. It's I see somebody who struggled, who doesn't fit the quote unquote idea of what a professor is supposed to be or something like that. And so I think that's why telling our story is valuable by being our authentic selves, is because as hard as it may be at times, or you never know who might be listening and who might be tuning in. Even with the podcast, sometimes I'm like, oh, is it worth all the effort that I put into it and whatnot? But just enough times I get an email that just tells me just how meaningful it was for somebody. I just got one the other day. If you end up listening to this, I'll send you a thank you note, but thank you for doing that, because it was a bright spot in the day when I was doubtful. So I appreciate that. And I think I want to go back to Donalee in just a minute, but we just passed the American holiday of Thanksgiving, and everybody has different views on it. But I think one thing that we should be able to unite on and agree on is the idea of gratitude being important. And that person that sent me that email the other day, sending me gratitude for the podcast, it motivated me. And I was like, something I've been trying to do in this disconnected world is, I used to be the person that would call my friends all the time that I hadn't talked to and say, hey, what's up, man? How are you doing? And I've gotten away from that. And once in a while, it's just a text or something. But the last couple of days, I've gotten up and I've sent voice messages, not like a voicemail, but just a voicemail to the text, and just wanted to say thank you. And that I appreciate certain people that helped me out and done things. And I want to make a commitment of that, because we can forget about gratitude in this world sometimes, and we get all caught up in the LinkedIns and the Instagram and promoting ourselves and trying to get the PhD so we can view ourselves as valuable enough and all of this, that at least for me, I can forget about those day-to-day interactions that are so meaningful. And each person that I've messaged with those gratitude comment, thanking them and trying to lift them up, each one of those people have expressed that it uplifted their day. And how easy is that for me to spend just a couple minutes being thankful for somebody and then letting them know? How often do we forget to do that? We're all so connected in so many ways, but in other ways we're losing those human to human connections, if you know what I mean.
For sure. Yeah. I like how similar it seems like we are, because, I had told myself, I mentioned in the beginning, like, oh, I don't have to come back to this campus for a month. And so I'm going to have a little bit of downtime right now. And I was telling my wife, one of the things I'm going to do is make a commitment to each day to reach out to someone who just kind of to chit chat, or depending on the person. Sometimes for me, some of them are like my grandmas and aunties and stuff like that, who I will actually make a phone call to. Some of our friends who I'll text. But yeah, the same thing, just to check in, and also just to, that's a good idea to just, hey, I'm just grateful for our relationship. I'm grateful for this or that. But that's a goal of mine in the next month too, that when I have some downtime, is to reach out to some people.
Yeah. I'm reading The Lord of the Rings to my kids right now, and we read The Fellowship of the Ring, but anybody that's familiar with it, the hobbits, they, on their birthday, they give everybody else a present. And so they were saying that pretty much everybody, every person in Hobbiton gets a gift just about at least once a week, and they really appreciate it. And I was just reflecting on that. Well, what if we gave the gift of gratitude every single day, like the Haudenosaunee Thanksgiving address, but it'd be even more on a personal level, but say each of us express gratitude to somebody different once every single day. And imagine the ripple effect that would have on the world and the universe. Just something so simple, but it's hard because we're so distracted and we're caught up in the things that we think that we have to do, or maybe we're hoodwinked into thinking that we have to do. So we forget about those things sometimes. And I think the last time we talked, Stephen, on the podcast, however long ago that was, a year plus ago, I think we reflected the same thing, that we were talking story and sharing things, and we realized how similar we are. So I think that's really cool. And I want to say I appreciate you, man. And thanks for taking the time to talk with me, but be here for our students as well. Before I turn to Donalee, there's a question in the chat. Anna asks, if that doctor wasn't honest with you about what he had seen, do you think, or do you believe you would have gotten to where you are now?
Probably not. I don't think so. Of course, you never know how things could work out. There could have been someone else down the road. And then also I have a awesome support system that's a big part of it also. But what that doctor said always rang in my mind, and it especially rang true because it was about 2 weeks later. I was sitting on the couch feeling great, and I was thinking, man, you know what? I've done so much good work. My skin's not yellow anymore. I've been eating healthy. I think I could probably have a beer, like just a beer, because I would never before just drink a beer. And then I was like, that's the stupidest thing. And that's pretty much what that doctor was saying. And so if the doctor wouldn't have said that, probably in that moment, I probably wouldn't have been able to, because my wife would have it would have been a big issue. Like, she would have probably also said, like, are you an idiot? Are you trying to kill yourself? But his words rang in my head like, shoot, this is what he said. And that was the first day, or maybe it was the next day, was the first time ever that I went to a recovery meeting, to an AA meeting, which I don't really do those anymore, but those are a big part of my recovery story. And in the beginning, I needed those. And I don't think I would have ever went if the doctor's words weren't ringing in my head, in my ear, however you say it.
Yeah, definitely. I think you would have made it, bro. Somebody else would have told you that, I think, and you would have found that, or you would have found that motivation somewhere. But I think that we owe those, I don't remember who it was. I think it was actually the administrator at my place, but we owe them a compliment for being real with us, telling us the truth, when they could have, many people in those kind of situations probably sugarcoat things for people instead of telling them what they really need to hear and the truth. And sounds like for you and me, at least, that's what we did need to hear. And it sparked some motivation in us. And that doctor still speaks to you all these years later through your head.
For sure.
Isabel asks, is there something that you look back on that society could have done better to help people with addiction?
That I look back on, I mean, I still think, I don't think we're doing that great of a job in general. I think it's all about relationships, right? I feel like most people that fall into addiction, somewhere it has to do with something going off track with relationships. And I feel like as a society, we're not doing a great deal. I mean, doing great on it. I am interested to see where the harm reduction views go, like to see what kind of changes that makes. For myself, harm reduction doesn't work because I already took my liver to the limit, and I can't even reducing, like I have to abstain. But I do love the concept and love the idea of like meeting people where they are, and that every level is not just as deep. And so maybe if at some point society wouldn't have tried to make everything so black and white and good and evil, we could have, because a lot of it is the shame and the guilt. And I think if we would have had for a longer time, had a more harm reduction is okay, doing less is okay, maybe you need this to keep you alive for now, but maybe you won't need it forever to get you through the pain, then maybe we would be in a better place than we are right now. But I feel like it's just going forward to see what difference that's going to make.
Yeah, if I could add to that, I would say I think it's either Gabor Mate or Stephen Hari that says that the opposite of the opposite of connection is addiction. So there's a lot of ways. And then, Gabor Mate would say that most people that go into hardcore addiction have some kind of trauma going on. And I think if society would ask the question of why the pain more than why the drugs or why the alcohol or what's behind it all, give us space to really be our authentic selves, and we would have a better way out of it. But I think the current trajectory of mankind or Western society or whatever is disconnection. As much as we are connected on here, we're often disconnected with our neighbor, disconnected with the people around us. And so I think the rise in addiction over time, a lot of that has to do with us being more and more disconnected. And Donalee, we've been marginalizing you for a while. And so feel free to chime in at any time if you have any thoughts or questions. And so I wanted to present something to both of you, or to whoever wants to answer it. But sticking on the topic of addiction, Stephen, when you probably know this, when you go oftentimes to whether it's AA, NA, whatever it is, they close with the Serenity prayer. You hold hands and you say the Serenity prayer. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I used to obviously do that at the meetings, but I used to do that like as a part of my prayer every single night. I'd say some version of that. And there's so much value and utility into having humility and knowing that you can't change everything. But years later, when I was in graduate school, I had a class with Angela Davis, and she would reframe the Serenity prayer into, I am no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I'm changing the things I can no longer accept. And what it made me realize is that, well, while the humility was valuable for me, I also took for granted that I had the power to change a lot of these things that I was just accepting about myself or about the world or whatever. And so I think from my perspective, a good balance of that, of humility, but also knowing that you actually do have the power to change a lot of things. And if you don't accept something, then the best thing you can do is start making a transition to changing that about, either whether it's yourself, or we can't change everything, large systems, but we can talk about it and we can make a dent in it that way. So I was wondering what your thought, either of you or both of you, your thoughts on the balance in that, between humility, but also taking up that power and not being held back by thinking that you can't change those things.
I would love to let Donalee chime in. She's been so patient.
Oh, no, it's fine. I learn. You learn a great deal. In this country, that we have to be in control, that we are in control. That's comes from then a lot of frustration, that things that you can't control. I think that we have to get to a point where there's things that we have to just let go. We can't change those. We have to let go. Things that we can work on changing, yeah, we should do it. But there are some things that we just can't control. The only person I can control is myself. I can control how I talk to other people. I can control what I think. I can suspend judgment. But basically, the only thing I can control is myself. And I think that when you come to that, which is really hard to get to, right? But once you do, there's some peace. And then you have more energy to work on the things that can be changed, because you're not fighting the things that are just they're out of your control.
And a lot of people that come in for help from a social worker, right? They are, and ourselves, we've probably been in this in our own lives as well, but they are transfixed on other people's problems. My wife, my parents, family. You might be able to influence them somewhat, but that's something that I think where that serenity prayer comes in handy, is having the humility to know I can't change other people. I can't change everyone. And so it comes back to giving you the power, focus that power that you have and that energy back on the self. Fill your own heart up first. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, you can help people to change, but they have to want to change. We can be there and help them, but we can't make them change.
Yeah, I come kind of somewhere in the middle on that. The serenity prayer in my sobriety life means one thing. It's powerful, but I also think that, and this was kind of some of the reasons why I disconnected myself from AA and those kind of things, is for marginalized people, marginalized communities. When you start carrying that over to okay, so that means something when you're talking about you're trying not to drink and these things are happening in your life and you can't control it. Well, you could still control that you are not drinking today, or you're not using meth today, or there's a lot of value in that. But I feel like at some point people start using that and saying kind of like, you just need to stay in your place. Don't get worked up over that. Don't worry about that. This is not your area to worry about. Stay in your lane, and we kind of been told that, or it's been implied to us most of our lives to kind of stay in our lane, rely on other people. And so, like what Angela Davis says, like, no, at some point, you're not just going to accept that you can't change that. Why can't I change that? Why? I've got to push back. I've got to, and that's where I'm at right now. So there's value in both of those prayers in my mind.
Yeah, I agree. Danelle had a comment. Danelle says, I just wanted to share a prayer that I made in treatment, since I like to lean more towards spirituality and my culture rather than religion. Creator, grant me the wisdom to honor the teachings of my ancestors, the courage to walk the path of my people with strength and humility, and the serenity to find balance between tradition and the challenges of today. And I just want to say thank you for sharing that, Danelle, and that's beautiful. And I think that there's nothing better than when I see a social work student or whoever, a social worker, a human being, that takes something that is more collectively used and makes it for themselves so it fits what's their own experience and their own life and their own life experience. And I just want to say it was beautiful. Danelle, thanks for sharing.
Yeah, thank you. That is.
Yeah, beautiful and powerful.
Power.
And big shout out to Danelle too. That's one of my strongest students. Been with me for a while now. And that's one of the privileges I have as a professor, is to be able to see people's growth over time, and really appreciate people like you, Danelle. So thank you. Well, let's transition a little bit. We've been talking about addiction, and we could probably talk about drugs and addiction and all that forever. But we got a lot we wanted to talk about. So I thought, let's talk about, bring Donalee more into the mix. And I know you're pretty much very knowledgeable about these areas too, Stephen, but the idea of, and students, you might have heard these words tossed around a little bit, but decolonization and indigenization. So when we're talking about education or social work education, I'll let you talk most about it, but one way I that helps me to look at it or to frame it from the beginning, if you're looking at decolonization and indigenization, is decolonization is kind of taking away things. You're trying to undo colonization, whereas indigenization is actually putting something in, putting more in. If you're going to decolonize, well, you better indigenize, because otherwise you're going to have, like Grandmother Rita said, you're going to have an HOLE, and you're not going to be WHOLE whole. And I think that applies not just to us, but to social work and our programs as well. And so you don't have to start off with doing the decolonization versus indigenization, but let's talk about it and let's help folks understand it and get a little deeper as we go forward. You want to start, Donalee?
Sure. And Stephen, I'm glad you're here because I think I can learn something from you too about this. First of all, decolonization has been like the big buzzword, right, in academia. So Tuck and Yang say it's been overused and it's lost its connection between the lived experiences of Native people and settler colonialism. So I think that we have to be very clear about what we mean. And Christian, I like that, what you said about, the D and so, but also decolonization, to me, it restores Indigenous worldviews, culture, and ways of knowing and being, traditional ways of life, while it replaces Western Euro perspectives of history with Indigenous perspectives. Okay, so you take that, and I'm thinking, how do I do that? How do I take that and transfer that to my teaching? And my thoughts are, being non-Native, I don't think I can. I could do it if I had input from Natives, or the best case scenario, if I was co-teaching with a Native. Then you could truly, I think, decolonize your teaching in the classroom. So when you look at indigenation or indigenization, it's recognizing the validity of the Indigenous worldviews and perspectives, and it incorporates this Indigenous ways of knowing in the curriculum. It also has adaptations of Western theories to non-Western context. Now that, yes, that can be doable for a non-Native. And what I do, I teach behavioral health intervention strategies. So each week we look at a different theory. Those theories are very Western Eurocentric. So what I have the students do is read 2 articles by Native scholars, peer-reviewed journal articles, that have done exactly that. They've used trans-theoretical models, stages of change, or they've used social cognitive theory. Whatever theory we're studying, they've used that for an intervention with a Native population. Trans-theoretical model, the one article my students read, an intervention was developed, educational intervention, and implemented with students at tribal colleges about organ donation. And so my students learn a little bit, because there's a little bit in the article about some, not all, of course, but some Native beliefs about that. So they're learning a little bit of the culture, but they're learning how the theory can be adapted. Let's see. The other one, social cognitive theory, there's an intervention that Natives had developed and implemented with middle school children, middle school students. They're not children, I guess, right, when they're middle school, but middle school students about HIV, STD, and AIDS. And they call their intervention the circle of life. And they use a circle divided into 4 quadrants, so similar to the medicine wheel. So those are ways to indigenize, being non-Native, and you're indigenizing. The students are reading articles written by Native scholars, so it's not me, being a non-Native, saying these things. My very favorite unit I teach on social connection, social networks. They have no readings that week, but they have 2 videos. And the one video is Abigail Echohawk of the Seattle Indian Health Board, right? And during the pandemic, she wrote the federal government for PPE, obligation of the federal government. So my students are learning a little bit about policy there. The federal government instead sends body bags. And she says, this is how the government views our people. Easier to bury them than send them things to sustain. But she turns one of the body bags into a ribbon dress. She uses the toe tags for fringe on the sleeves, and she puts her handprint in red on the dress. And she's explaining all of the meaning and the things when she's making this dress. So the students are seeing this in the video. And she says that she puts those handprints on the dress so that her children would be able to identify her if she goes missing. So I say to my students, I have a daughter, and that thought has never occurred to me, that I have to leave something that she could find that would identify me if I go missing. I've never thought, why would I go missing? I said, and so I tell the students, this is white privilege. So it's just a very impactful video. The other one they watch is the Nimiipuu in Idaho. They get a little bit of policy because they learn about the Self-Determination Act and how federally recognized tribes can contract with the government to get the funds that would normally go to Indian Health Service, and they have their own. They have their own health center. So they see this, and they see the social connection and the social networking. The medical director was from there. She grew up there. People in the video talk about that. We remember her playing basketball. It's a complete clinic. There's a pharmacy, there's eye, there's dental. Amazing, amazing. Things are labeled in English and Nimiipuu, in their language. The one person says, oh, you might see your aunt here working or your sister. We know each other. But at the end of the video, the medical director, she says, there's no greater honor. And she has tears in her eyes as she says, there's no greater honor than taking care of your own people. So my students hear Native voices. They see resilience. They see positive things. After all, isn't social work a strength-based perspective? We should be focusing on the strengths that everybody brings. And also for health, social determinant of health is culture. And that, Stephen, like you said, you reconnected with your culture. That's health. That helps your health. Studies have shown when you're connected to your culture, you have a better health outcome. So anyway, those are my thoughts on the two different and how I balance that. And there's other things I could talk about that not just in the classroom, what the school, social work departments, what universities can do, because here in Pennsylvania, we have no federally recognized tribes. We have no reservation. Studies have shown that 78% of schools teach nothing about Native people after the 1900s. Other studies have shown that about 73%, maybe a little more, people have no knowledge of Native people. So any little bit that you can bring into the classroom is so important. First day of class, students make a 2 to 3 minute video. There's prompts. And one of those prompts is, tell us whose land you're on. And they get the link for the website. It could be their land they're on now, the land they grew up on, a favorite vacation spot. So bringing that awareness, I think, is just essential, and not getting caught up in this, I've indigenized my syllabus. How do you do that? How is that done?
Besides myself being Indigenous, Lakota, and a social worker, it's also it was the basis of my thesis so part of what I did, the whole process. Luckily, I have an awesome chair, awesome committee that was down with it. I didn't write in the abstract, introduction, literature review. I started doing it that way. I did my undergraduate thesis that way, but then started reading a book. I recommend it for any Indigenous researcher, but really, anyone could use it. Research is Ceremony. I started reading that book. Yeah, it's great. In the middle of me writing it, and I felt myself using it some and citing, trying to explain. And then I told my chair, let me just write it this way. Let me just write it in a narrative, storytelling way, incorporating everything from my personal life, incorporating how this makes me feel. So when you're talking about indigenizing, some of the key points on that are how important relationships are. So if you're a social worker, or you're a counselor, therapist, researcher, whatever, from a Western sense, a lot of times we're talked about, don't self-disclose too much, don't put yourself too much out there, well, from an Indigenous perspective, everything is about that. Everything is about relationships. So you're telling someone to not do what they're supposed to do, or what you're always taught to do, the most important things. And then respect is a big part of it. Everything is about respect. And then reciprocity, right? Everything is an exchange. And a lot of people look at that as kind of there's negative connotations put to that sometimes, but that's really the way that life work for a long time. I'm doing this for you today, or we're doing this. We're doing the podcast. Christian, you're getting something out of it. I'm getting something out of it. Donalee, you're getting something. We're all getting something out, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. And so, for me, taking all of that and putting it into my research, but as a social worker, to me, that's the only way you can really work with communities is you have to build up the relationships. And we try to teach that, but then on the other hand, we also say like, oh, you have to stay impartial, or, oh, you can't get too involved, or, well, then you wonder like, well, how come these programs aren't really taking off, or how come they're so out of tune with what the community really needs? The same thing with research. I would never, and I say this very early on in my research career, I will never work on a research project that I don't have a personal connection to. I do not want to just be writing, or, hey, I just need to do this because I need so many publications as quick as possible. Did last year for one of the PhD courses I'm in, a project that was for an assignment, but also to submit to get published. And I did it on violence against Indigenous women, but it was a meta-synthesis. So I'm reading these stories of these Native women, these Indigenous women, the people to me that are sisters, aunties, and of the violence against them, and telling their story. But I'm feeling the burden, but I don't see a face to this person. I can't offer them any comfort. I felt so connected, but yet so disconnected. I was like, I'm never doing this again. I will certainly work, to help end violence against Indigenous women, but not with that level of disconnection in it. So to me, indigenizing is about the relationships, about connections. And then as far as the decolonize, Donalee, I do think that it's really on non-natives to decolonize, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because a lot of, to me, the colonized part of it is and with social work, I think it's like the scientification of social work, where like everything has to be evidence-based. You're only right if you're following this step, this step, this step. With
this Western Euro perspective, you got 1, 2, 3, A, B, C.
ABC, because everything has to be like the most efficient. And to me, what does efficiency always come back to? It always comes back to money. Like, right, this is going to be quicker, and so that way we can pump it out. We can tell somebody else very easily how to replicate it. They should get the same results, which we know is never how it works, but that's really how,
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, the first step in decolonization is to admit that you've been colonized.
Wow.
And then
Yeah.
the next step is to look at how you're living your life and the choices you're making. Are you furthering, supporting oppressive ideology? So, yes, I mean, you just can't go in and decolonize a syllabus is my point. There's
Right.
steps, here we go, Western, right? There's things that have to be done. And yeah, Stephen, you're right. I mean, I was very fortunate that my committee let me use Indigenous methodology, because I know some Native people that wanted to do that, and they got such pushback. They weren't allowed to do it, that it wasn't true research, but I was allowed to do that. And yeah, I mean, having relationships established, I mean, I have to say it changed my life.
Good.
It really changed my life. I originally was going to do a quantitative, because at that point, quantitative dissertation, because I didn't know any Native people. But as you know, Christian, Stephen, the data isn't there, right? They're lumped together as others. So their data wasn't really there to do a quantitative at the PhD caliber. So I had to switch gears, and I thought, it's not ever going to happen. Prior to this, I've been doing the work, right? I'm very close to Carlisle, the Indian boarding school. I go over Memorial Day when they clean the graves and there's ceremony, and I've started doing the work, right, from the get-go. And I thought, well, qualitative dissertation, this is never going to happen. Who's going to talk to me? I'm a white woman. I'm a colonizer. I'm a settler. And it changed my life, because people talked, and they were warm. They were forthcoming. I mean, it's Stephen, it's not an interview, it's a conversation. So, I mean, we cried, we laughed, I mean, one of them, she's a PhD psychologist, and she said to me, "Oh, so you're on your way to becoming a post-hole digger." I mean, the sense of humor, right? I mean, as I said, it's truly changed my life.
Amazing, amazing. Yeah, and that's what my committee members were saying the same thing too, because one of them said, when I started going through your paper, I started like, well, where's this? Where's it, with her pen, so to speak, marking through. And then she said, wait, I have to decolonize the way that I'm reviewing this. And then when I did my defense, my committee chair said, don't like, a PowerPoint is colonize, like, right, like I'm making a PowerPoint to talk about my decolonized research. She said, that's colonized, like, don't even do it. But in my mind, like, I have to cover my butt, right? Like, as a Indigenous person who's trying to make it in academia. So I still had the PowerPoint that covers everything that they're asking someone to cover in their defense. And then we still did the defense. We did it a decolonized way without it. But I still feel like, because it's never going to stop, that you're going to get people that are still going to say, well, that's not really research, or that's not really social work. That's not really evidence-based, right? So I feel like you have to do double the work sometimes when you're decolonizing, which I would just ask, because I think a lot of Native students, Indigenous students are going to want to do that. They got to have the support, and then they got to have the non-natives that kind of like have their back when they do it, and trust them that, like, hey, I didn't not make a PowerPoint because I'm slacking off. I made a PowerPoint. I didn't make a PowerPoint because a PowerPoint presentation is very colonized compared to me storytelling and telling the story of my thesis and us all talking in a talking circle and sharing together.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Ideal, right? Mine was a compromise. I used, you pick your battles judiciously. And my conceptual framework was tribal critical race theory. So they gave me a lot of leeway. So
yeah, I had the in research and ceremony, they call them the strategies of inquiry. So I had those in there instead of methods, and I had a case study, qualitative interviewing, autoethnography, and then one of my chair members said, when you go back and edit, take all of those words out of there, all of those words. And even I was like, what? They're Western methods. Like, your paper is fine without them. Just describe it as storytelling instead of autoethnography. It's like, what?
Oh, you just answered the question I was going to ask. Autoethnography to storytelling. I like that.
Yeah, yeah. But see, even my brain, like, this is the only way I've ever been taught. Like, I'm sitting in the same social work classes as everyone else too. I'm not in any different, classes. So I was like, I didn't know what to do besides use a code book when I did these talking circles with men to find out what the themes were. Like, I don't know.
No, I didn't do that. I just, yeah. And you know how they're so big on technology and the software, right? That you use the software, but the software doesn't make your codes. So I didn't use I hand did it, and I made index cards, and it just made more sense visually to see where I was going with it. And then with qualitative research, they have you present your findings linear, right? Or hierarchical. And I struggled for a really long time because that just didn't fit. It just didn't feel right. So then I came up with a circle, and that's how but you were talking about, like, the respect, the responsibility, the relevancy. And so the responsibility, like, I take that very seriously, and it's just not to the 12 people that made my dissertation possible. I feel like it's to all Native people. So I put myself out there to go talk, right, about Indigenous methodology, to show some of my research, combined my findings from my dissertation. I do that at conference. I go in if they'll let me. This is another really interesting thing, that Western Eurocentric paradigm is knowledge is owned, but Indigenous perspective knowledge is shared. And I think that's one of the reasons why they wanted to talk to me. They were so willing to have a conversation with me, because they're sharing that knowledge. But I have really found that in academia, how owned it is. Child welfare, right? And I say to the people that teach that, let me come in and guest lecture about Indian Child Welfare Act. Oh, we cover that. Or, oh, well, there's not natives here, so they really don't need to know that. And I'm like, it's the gold standard of child welfare. They do, but they won't let me in the classroom. Knowledge is owned. We can't do that. Some of them let me in. I talk about into to the like masters, mainly doctoral students, Indigenous methodology research. Some will, but I had one. This is a great one. I said, can I come in? And this is doctoral students, masters and doctoral students. Can I come in and talk about, she teaches qualitative research. Can I come in and talk about Indigenous methodology, share my findings from my dissertation and all that? And she says, and like you said, Steve, it's narrative, right? Storytelling. So it's narrative. Narrative is one of the 5 types of qualitative research. Storytelling is narrative. And she says, oh, no, that's, students won't understand. Like, masters and doctoral student? Oh, okay. So that door is so closed, we can't share that knowledge. We have to have such ownership.
I think one of the criticisms, the biggest criticisms I have, not directly towards decolonization or anything like that, but you find this also in anti-racism sometimes. But I've been to a couple workshops, what was the other one called? Workshops, but basically conferences or conventions where either decolonization or anti-racism or something was the agenda. And rather than using methods that align with that, instead they use the banking model of education, like Paulo Freire talked about, where basically you stand in front of the class and you give the information to them and they're supposed to receive it. But in my experience, in my opinion, in my reflections, the only really way to integrate yourself into something like decolonization or anti-racism and really manifest those things and embody them is to be a part of it. And so you have to be a part of that process, and nobody can deliver that to you. And neither could one talking circle wouldn't do it either, but it might plant the seed and give the person the opportunity to see how they might move forward in that way. And so that's my criticism, is oftentimes we're using the banking model where we're thinking that it's just something that you can teach somebody. But I don't believe that that's so. And I think it uses it looks along the framework of how cultural competency is often looked at. It's like it's something that you can achieve, a box that you can check. And I know, Donalee, you reflected on that as well with syllabi. And sometimes I think you can take this to other elements too. I remember the first time I heard somebody, at least the first time I remember hearing a land acknowledgement, I was in Hawaii, and it was back to that Angela Davis class. She gave a keynote one night, and she did a land acknowledgement. She said, I can't remember exactly what she said, but the gist of it was that she was reflecting that this land belonged to Native Hawaiians, where the university's built. Historically, that's where they were at. And she reflected, though. I don't remember exactly what she said, but she reflected. She spent like 5 minutes reflecting on it. I was like, wow, that was really deep and meaningful. I'd never even thought about something like that. And then I just want to juxtaposition that with an experience I had the other day at a faculty senate meeting. And the land acknowledgement is just read through and then moved on immediately. And I don't want to criticize any individuals because I don't know everything that's going on and what they do outside of that. But to me, that's where it gets into the performative box checking. Okay, well, we read it at the beginning, but nobody had an opportunity to reflect on it. I don't know of any actual work being done to give back the land, for example. And so if it lacks that reflection, it's still just marginalized, in my opinion. And one more example I wanted to give was, we often in social work refer to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you do a little digging, you can see that it actually came from, he got that when he visited the Blackfoot Nation. And so many teachers that are decolonizing or indigenizing might put that in there, but oftentimes it's still marginalized, right? We're going to teach about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and then we're going to tell you that, well, actually he took this, but it's over here on the margin. Well, if we're really decolonizing, then wouldn't we recenter that to where it should be centered, if that makes sense? And it's hard to do when everything's against you. And then you also talk about university level. Well, a lot of the norms, right, are going to disincentivize you from doing anything like that. They may even suggest it to you, and they may even require for you to put something in the syllabi, but everything else, it seems, disincentivizes it. And one example would be talking circle. And Stephen, you brought up efficiency, right? The other day I was talking about neoliberalism with some Australian critical social work scholars, and it's all about efficiency, right? And saying like everything has to be evidence-based and this and that. But so when somebody like me does it, facilitates talking circles, I think some people would recognize the evidence, but in the traditional, I shouldn't say traditional, but in the Western model of education, most folks are going to think I'm being inefficient and I really can't demonstrate how it equates to the students learning the material of my class. And so they'd say that I'm wasting my time. But I think if you talk to the students and if you really had a window into it, you'd see how efficient we really are being. But we're being efficient with things like healing up our heart, with connecting with each other, with supporting each other. And while we may express those values, oftentimes those values aren't embodied within what we're actually doing at universities, especially post-pandemic, moving into the Zoom. It's great that we can connect like this, but it's also sad that in some instances, all connection has been reduced to this instead of it being an option for when we can't meet physically. It's now the standard. And so I think, I know that was a lot, but in a nutshell, I just think when we're thinking about decolonization, when we're thinking about indigenization, and even like things like anti-racism, we have to make a bigger effort to make sure that we're allowing space for everybody to actually be a part and contribute to their own learning and their own knowledge and be a contributor to that and valuing their experience. Even if Nongan Elder Ilarion Merculiev would say, like in a talking circle, you got to listen without an agenda. Whereas oftentimes in my work, not necessarily in the talking circle, but when people respond to me, if say I write something or I make a video, most of the time the way that they respond is they write me and they say, well, I agreed with this and I disagreed with this. And I understand that we can agree and disagree on things, but are we able to just listen to each other and you just value my experience and my thoughts without agreeing or disagreeing with it and just take it in and let those seeds plant in you, and then I'll do the same and I'll listen to you and you'll plant your seeds within me maybe. And you never know, tomorrow we might be just a little bit more closer together than we were before, but you can't do it by teaching me. We both have to be a part of it. Now, I know that was a little bit of a rant, but just my feelings on some of those things.
Yeah, good stuff. I'm right there with you on that. Performative stuff. That's another big thing that I work on. Of course, is the land acknowledgements and things like that. Native people have all sorts of different views on those. To me, I find the value in all of these things with land acknowledgement, decolonization, anti-racism, and all of them when they're there because they give you a chance to at least have something to hold someone accountable to. When I hear that a university has a land acknowledgement, then at least there's something for the indigenous people in that area to say, okay, now what are you going to do about it? What land are you going to give back? What students are you going to, give scholarships to pay back for setting them so far back down, a generation so far back? At least there's something there for a place that if people were to throw out and say, you know what? No use for land acknowledgements. No use for using the word decolonization. It's just a word. It doesn't mean anything. Then you don't even have a way to I love it if I have a professor that says they decolonized their syllabus, because at least now I can say, okay, now what's decolonized about it? What can we actually do? It gives a little something. So I know some people will say just get rid of all of it. Just get rid of, there shouldn't be any of that language. It all means nothing. It's all just performative. At least if the performative's there, it gives indigenous people and other marginalized people something to grasp at and fight with. So from my perspective, there is value in land acknowledgement. There is value in a professor that's at least saying they're going to decolonize and check the box, or a university that puts that. But then it's on everybody else to take it to the next level, to actually push them to put the action behind that, to push everybody. And again, it may never happen. We may never, ever be able to decolonize social work or decolonize academia, but you can decolonize some minds. You can decolonize some processes. I truly believe that.
Hey, I just wanted to say that I'm not saying that land acknowledgement is bad in any way, or that it's not valuable in any way. I think what I'm trying to get across is that instead of just reading or inserting a land acknowledgement that, say, somebody else wrote, or even if you do just insert it, then make sure you have a conversation, even if it's with yourself, in reflection. That's what I'm saying, that take it a little deeper and make sure that it's not just performative, that we're having a space where we can talk about it. So if your students heard you read it, that at least there's an opportunity for them to ask about it or to learn more. But even you're right about like, if you just have it in the syllabi, or even if you're just reading it, well, at least it's out there for somebody to hear. Before, I mean, not too long ago, people weren't doing that at a university, so it wouldn't even be there. And so I just wanted to clarify that I wasn't trying to diss it in any way. I'm just trying to say that we should step up our game and add that critical reflection, critical reflective or critical dialogue piece to it.
Absolutely.
And that's, I agree, Stephen, with everything you've said. However, I've seen that professors say they've decolonized their syllabus and that's done. They've not met one Native. They don't do anything on Indigenous Peoples Day or the month of November. So you have to do the work. You really have to do the work. You have to be sincere. You can't just check that box off. Yeah, like you were saying, okay, Indigenous Peoples Day, my students learn about the Morale Act, passed in 1862 by the federal government to establish state universities, because not everybody got to go to school, meaning only the white elite men got to go. So this was maybe for the other white men that weren't so elite. But what was that? They gave universities pieces of paper or scripts for land. Penn State's land came from the upper Midwest to the Midwest. How did the government get that land? They stole it from the Native people, or they paid little money, not anything what it was worth. And each state got land depending on how many people they had in Congress. So Penn State got over 700,000 acres of land. Penn State has the second largest endowment after Cornell because of land. And as people call it, land grab, right? It was a land grab. So my students learn about the Morale Act on Indigenous Peoples Day. And I tell them, you're part of the Penn State community. You should have an understanding of how your university was founded. These things are important.
I grew up in Utah, and I would say that I had no idea that was connected to the word Ute until, I couldn't tell you when, but as an adult maybe. There's the Utah Utes football team. And I would say, this is just a guess, I don't want to throw too much out there, but if you were to sit outside the stadium on game day and survey people on whether they knew somebody that was related to the Utes or from the Ute tribe, or what they knew, and it would be like little to no information at all. And so I think we're lucky to have universities like where I'm at, where at least they're talking about those things. And I don't want to diss University of Utah, because they might be doing things that I don't know about. I'm not involved in what they're doing. Just what I observe. And we're running out of time. I got to get out of here. But there was one other piece that I wanted to just get your thoughts on. And it's kind of multifaceted. So I'll start here. Politics always comes into play when we're talking about these things. And I want to think back all the way back to remember when Standing Rock was going on, and it was all over the news, Democracy Now! Was there every day and things like that. And I've been following it. Me and my wife were following it closely. We were about as highly invested as you could be without being able to be there. And I remember there was I was watching a news clip at that time of Donald Trump, the president at the time, and he sat there and he had just signed the bill for the pipeline or whatever to push it through. And he sat there and he said, "Can you believe it? I haven't received one call or anybody that's complained about this at all." And I'm thinking, well, I just watched on TV and there were like, I don't know how many people there, but at least thousands of people at the very minimum. Well, are they not people, or they? And I've also heard them talk about how they're blowing up the phones. So I'm confused. Are they not? Are you saying they're not people? Are you saying you're ignoring them? You don't consider their opinion? I would just, like, what does that mean to say that nobody cares or that nobody's complained about it, considering there's massive protests going on that I'm sure he's aware of to some degree at least. And so that's disheartening. And Trump's been reelected, obviously. And I think one of the major concerns, which I don't hear people talking about that much, is the way that him and people of his administration have, what's the word I want to use, just completely not acknowledged anything regarding to do with indigeneity or American Indians or indigenous people in America. And I saw recently he's been buddying up with Elon Musk, and I saw a post that he had reshared, and then there's another guy too that's up in the conservative side of things, Matt Walsh, who made a documentary, Am I Racist and What is a Woman? kind of slandering those movements a little bit. But they were reposting these videos that were just saying that all the people that, are representing Indigenous people and Indigenous ways of being, that it was just a huge criticism of it. Not even criticism is the right word, like a slandering of it. Like I was baffled. Like, why would a billionaire want to post something like this? Why wouldn't he be, I don't know. But it was very disheartening. And then the last part I wanted to mention is that I think it also ties into our current president, Joe Biden, and he obviously does more to acknowledge Native peoples, and he's appointed some Native people. And Stephen, I know you know about the recent apology he made about boarding schools and things like that, which definitely deserves credit. And you compare that, you juxtaposition that with what Trump does, and there's not even an acknowledgement. But then I also am disheartened by the situation with his son, where he pardoned Hunter Biden. Now, I'm not that upset about pardoning your son per se, because I think that if I were to be able to stop my son from going to jail, I would do the same thing. What I don't like about it is the constant moral high ground of that that Republicans are the only ones that do those things for political purposes, and then he does it. And then I'm a big supporter of political prisoners. I've become friends with many of those. I've shared a few letters with Mr. Leonard Peltier, who's still in prison. Lakota man, if you don't know who he is, I don't have time to give you a background. Everybody that's listening to background, go watch Incident to Oglala. It's on HBO, I think, or read In the Spirit of Crazy Horse, or just look. There's lots of people that are still supporting Leonard Peltier. But he's been locked up for like 40 plus years, very sick. And whether you think he did the crime or not, you have to take in the context of what was happening at that time and the circumstances. And both the other guys that he was tried with were found innocent, or at least not guilty, or something like that. I can't remember exactly. But as far as my knowledge, that Biden hasn't even acknowledged Mr. Peltier. And a few of my other friends eventually got released from prison after decades behind, and then they got out and they were so sick that they passed away. And I know that there's so much value that Leonard Peltier can give to his community, and he deserves to get out and give his family a hug. He's an artist. And I just wanted to say this, and I'll let you all have some thoughts as we get out of here. But I think that Joe Biden, it's messed up that you don't acknowledge him, and that you don't take the last few months of your presidency to pardon people like him, or drug addicts and things like that. And I want to emphasize that I do see the difference in Joe Biden and Donald Trump, and I'm not equating the two of them exactly, because one's not even acknowledging and one is at least doing something and with acknowledgement in there. But I just wanted to say that it disheartens me that certain people get pardoned and certain people don't, especially when it comes into political prisoners that have spent decades behind bars. And I can see no negative outcome from pardoning Leonard Peltier and allowing him to go home to his people and his family. And it pisses me off. And so in a way. And so I just wanted to take my space here and reflect that, and just wonder what you all's thoughts are. I know that was a couple of different things, but I wanted to get that out there.
Yeah. I don't know how I can be brief without...
You don't have to be brief. Take your time.
Because you said a lot that I agree with, almost word for word, right? And I think it compares back to a lot of what we were talking about, as far as, even if you're just talking about decolonizing or a land acknowledgement, the way I look at these two guys, Joe Biden and Donald Trump, is maybe one that would implement a land acknowledgement and read it, and then you're kind of like, okay, now what are you going to do though? And another one that would just flat out, I'm never reading this. I'm never what is this? I'm not acknowledging this land. We took this land. This land is ours. So it's kind of those two different attitudes. Neither one of them are what you really want. Neither one of them is the best attitude. One, I think, is so obviously better, at least to have, at least if one will acknowledge Indigenous people, will acknowledge the harm that was done. I think, to me, the biggest loss as a Lakota person, as a Native person, the biggest loss in the change of administration is going to be Deb Haaland not being in the cabinet anymore. I think she made a lot of inroads with actual land back, with the Truth and Healing in the boarding school, and bringing some of the things like that. I feel like not only is the progress going to be stopped, I think a lot of that work is going to be undone. There's going to be action taken to take land back, to drill in places where it was determined they couldn't drill, things like that. So in a way that it it worries me, but then I try to keep the perspective of not only as Indigenous people, but as other groups of people that's been fighting. So like we've always fought. We never stopped fighting. We've always survived. They purposely, intentionally tried to wipe all of my people out, but I'm still here today. My grandma was still here. She went through the boarding school. She went through my great grandpa went through the boarding school, went through all of that. They had their ceremonies were illegal. They could not do them at all. They were totally reliant on the government and on the church. But yet here we are today. And so I feel like we'll persevere. People will persevere. People will go through, whether it's 4 years or whether everything is changed from here on out. But again, going back to what we were saying with the Serenity prayer and the things like that, that doesn't mean that we just got to sit back and say, oh, this is the way it is. Like, we're going to continue to fight. I hope that Joe Biden, with the little bit of time that he has left, that now, especially with him pardoning his son, that some of that pressure is put on him now, and that if he does have a conscience, which I believe he does, that he will listen to some of that. Like, you know what? I pardoned my son, and maybe all along he has this bigger plan. I think it would have been smoother and wiser for him to maybe pardon a lot of people at one time and say, and by the way, my son is one of these people that I'm pardoning. But now maybe people can put the pressure on him. Leonard Peltier, all of the people that are in federal prison for drug crimes, which are like legal, or which are not even considered crimes anymore, but the people are still sitting in prison right now, things like that. There's a lot he can do, a lot I hope he can do, or hope he will do. Again, my hopes are not necessarily too high on him or on his administration, but they are high on that people will put that pressure on him. And now there's another good way to put the pressure. But yeah, to bring Mr. Peltier home, to bring the other people that are in federal prison for marijuana crimes that wouldn't even be considered a crime right now, and things like that.
Yeah, I think that's an easy one that he could do, is especially low mid-level marijuana vendors. That seems like an easy decision, and I'm not sure why it's not already been done.
Yeah. My husband was not from here. He became a naturalized citizen, but he came from a different culture, and he really opened my eyes and gave me a lot of food for thought about a lot of things. And he said that in this country, they're so harsh with punitive. It's a very punitive, unforgiving society. And he talked about when one of his uncles was in jail, that he as a young boy was responsible for taking the lunch and the dinner to his uncle so the kids could go in, see, visit. So yeah, there's no reason Leonard Peltier should be in prison for as long as he has. There's absolutely no risk. That's so unjust. My husband really opened my eyes to the penal system here and how horrible. And I just want to say, I had the opportunity to go to prison. Everybody's like, but one of the people that I've had the pleasure of getting to know is the Dene pastor for the Native inmates. And so I was able to go for the day and spend the day with them. And it was the most moving experience in my life. I have never felt like so valued, so appreciated. They did an honor song for me. I just had tears in my eyes. It was just such a wonderful experience. And it's just so sad how it is in this country, how people are so imprisoned for things that really are not a crime. We're just so unforgiving. We're just so punitive to one another.
Yeah, in this country, you can be picked on and abused your whole life. And if you do something outside the lines as a result of that, then you're the one that gets punished. And that wasn't a very articulate way to say it, but I think another...
Very well said.
Well
said, Christian.
Thank you. I think I don't have all the stats in front of me, so I don't want to say I know exactly, but people might be surprised. We often hear talk about Black Lives Matter and Black people getting shot by the police, and not to minimize that or diminish it at all, but you should look up the stats for Indigenous people in America and see the rate that they get killed at. I don't have the rate right in front of me, but you might be shocked and you might be surprised that it's so high and that it's not talked about. And then another time, we're going to have to talk again, Stephen, for sure, but the missing and murdered Indigenous women, every time I hear somebody talk about it, I've been in discussion, they tell me that it's much worse than you can than you can imagine, or or it was much worse than I imagined it was when I went in. I've heard that sentiment shared dozens of times to me already. And so I think that that's where we see, like, where Donald Trump is saying, I can't see you. You see that also just in general. And when I talk about growing up in Utah, right, I can't see you. And I don't think it's intentional on everyone's behalf, but they're definitely not intentionally looking and making sure that they're making up for the veil that's put over us. And we got to do better. And I can commit to that as an individual. And I think we see evidence of that with Donalee, the way that she's indigenizing her curriculum, the genuine curiosity that she has, and the way that you can tell that Donalee, that you reflect on it in yourself. And so there's more and more people like you that are showing up in this universe, that are popping up. And I'd say it goes back to what Stephen said, decolonizing the mind. And we can help do that through education and whatnot, but ultimately the individual has got to put that effort there themselves. And so, yeah, it seems like I did want to throw a nugget to everybody. I've said I'm getting rid of textbooks in my class. Well, maybe not getting rid of the textbook, but making them pay for it. And so there's a great book that I've adopted if you're interested in things like decolonizing the mind, Dr. Michael Yellowbird and Chris Clark. But Dr. Michael Yellowbird's awesome. If you even check out my YouTube, and I've got a few videos of him on talking about decolonizing the mind. But he has a textbook and it's open source. Look it up. It's called Reintegrating Pathways, Decolonizing the Mind, or something like that. But if you need a textbook for like human behavior in the social environment and you want to supplement it with other stuff, check out something like that, Dr. Michael Yellowbird. Well, I got to go. I'm sure that my daughter's movie's over upstairs and she's waiting on me. Big props to her for being such a good girl. And before we get out of here, I just want to say thanks to everybody that came in the audience. First, there was a couple comments. I'll read these real quick just to make sure we didn't forget about anything important. Isabel added in that she grew up in Louisiana until she moved to Alaska. She never learned anything about Indigenous culture. It's shocking the way Western education is ignored. A huge part of history. Amen.
Yeah, and real quick, I'm going to say on that, because I had seen that comment, and they have 15 tribes in Louisiana, four of them federally recognized. And so they don't even teach about it in places where there are Native people. It's wild.
Well, and if they do, the studies have shown they only teach it up to the 1900s.
Yeah, it's all history. When there's living people there,
Yeah.
tribes there, people.
Well, people ask me, how are you going to do this work? How are you going to do this dissertation? Because aren't they all dead? So there's work to be done. I really feel strongly that that's my responsibility to all the Native people, and the ones that I wouldn't have this PhD without those 12 wonderful people and all the people that came before them and are coming after, that are talking to me, educating me, welcoming me. I am just so grateful, and I have that really strong sense of responsibility that back to them.
Absolutely. Danelle added, unfortunately, she had to step away to pick up her son, but I'm leaving the space feeling deeply grateful and uplifted. Thank you to everybody for this meaningful conversation. Stephen, congratulations on your continued sobriety and your incredible journey. It's from Danelle. Thanks, Monica. Thanks, Liana, for coming. Thanks, everybody that came. We really appreciate you. If you're listening to this later, we appreciate you too. Love to hear your thoughts. So make sure you drop us a comment or email me or whatever you would like. And most of all, I wanted to thank Stephen and Donalee for generously blessing us with your time, with your expertise, with your experience. I just wanted to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. Sometimes a long conversation can be boring, or it can be I can have trouble paying attention. And I'm just happy to say that my ADD doesn't pick up when I talk to you two. You know what I mean? I'm interested in what you have to say. I learned a lot. I filled up my heart, and that's all that I can expect. And I hope that it touches some of the people that end up tuning in the same way. So big thank you from the bottom of my heart, from my family to your families. Much respect and much appreciated. Thank you.
Well, thank you both. It was a pleasure to meet you, Stephen. And both of you, let's stay in touch, please. I would love that. And it's been a privilege and an honor, Christian, to be on your podcast. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Donalee. Nice to meet you. And yeah, let's stay in contact. And then, yeah, thanks again, Christian, for this space. And yeah, we could easily keep going for hours, and I would not even run out of interesting stuff to talk about with you. So this is good.
Yeah, well, let's connect again sometime and make it happen. But right now, take your holiday break, both of you, and spend some time with your family, with yourself. Take that healing time. And just take care of yourselves and your people. All right, everybody, take care, and we'll see you next time.